Welcome to the BankTalk podcast, the show where we talk to leaders and experts from the community banking sector. Whether you are a current CEO or aspire to be one, this podcast will give you valuable insights and advice on how to run your financial institution better. Each episode features a different topic and a guest who shares their experience and knowledge with us. Tune in and learn something new with BankTalk podcast.
Hi, and welcome to BankTalk. I'm Charlie Kelly, your host and partner at Remedy Consulting. Today, I've got with me Rene Perez. I reached out to Rene. He's been a guest on the BankTalk podcast before. He's the National Director of Sales and Financial Crimes Consultant at Jack Henry. The reason I reached back out to Rene was we've been hearing, I think everybody's well published on what AI can do for the fraudsters. And so there have been a lot of stories in the media about how fraudsters are using AI to try to bilk people out of their money. But what I thought Rene might have some insight into that might be interesting for our listeners is just what the good guys are doing related to trying to prevent fraud using AI. So Rene, welcome back to BankTalk.
Thank you, Charlie. Thanks for having me.
But mainly what I wanted to get you on here for is, we had a great fraud conversation last time, right? One of the things that came up in there, well, I think we just briefly touched on how the fraudsters are using AI specifically to, defraud folks. The one that you see on the media, I think, is typically grandma, maybe the kid goes down to Mexico for spring break. 10 minutes later, grandma's getting an urgent phone call from somebody who sounds and looks, maybe not even looks, but let's just say sounds in the early days like the grandchild. And they're saying, I'm in jail and I need, $10,000 sent immediately in cash, right?
Yep.
Now I'm sure they're more sophisticated than that these days, but I thought what we could do is maybe talk through sort of other things the fraudsters might be doing, and then let's touch on the things that the banks and the fintechs are doing to try to stifle some of that. So maybe let's look at the bad guys first. We'll look at the good guys, and then we kind of go from there and see where this thing takes us. If you're good with it,
sounds great.
All right, let's start with the bad guys. Outside of grandma, what else is going on out there that the bad guys are doing to try to get a few bucks out of? I know there's not a few bucks, sometimes a lot of bucks, but
there's a lot of bucks.
Yeah, what are they trying to do to take money that doesn't belong to them?
Yeah, so the grandma story, spot on. It's interesting. They're starting to get better results with AI in voice and facial recognition. We've started seeing now that same instance of grandma become a FaceTime message. So now they see their grandson. Their grandson is sitting there having a conversation with them, and they need the money, and they steer them to the closest Western Union or MoneyGram or any which way, now Zelle, to get money out as part of it. So we were starting to see a change in becoming more visual in their attacks because, again, I hear a voice and the question is, prove it from that perspective. So we're seeing a lot of that happening. We've been seeing fake IDs, for instance, and they've been more digital images, right? So that I can go open an account at an institution digitally, so because I don't have to have that physical driver's license. We've seen some newer technology, 3D printers that can print to the exact specification with all the security security features, holograms, everything that's on driver's license.
Really? Wow.
So we've taken a driver's license that was fake. We've taken a driver's license that was real. We've handed that driver's license to different officers of that state, and they couldn't tell the difference between the fake one and the real one.
Wow.
So we're starting to see that. There's a lot of new 3D printing that's being sold on the dark web as part of that. You're starting to see more and more money being spent by the fraudsters in developing new tools, especially with AI. So I'll throw something else from an AI perspective. Every one of our institutions in the country When you ask the institution, hey, do you guys go through phishing and vishing and smishing learning lessons, and even some organizations test you on it, right? The one thing that they do and they test you quite often is notice the things of phishing emails, notice things like misspellings, improper grammar, urgency, that email is coming from the incorrect site, that type of thing. As simple as ChatGPT, Gemini, Meta, any of these large language models that are out there today, fraudsters can have figured out now I can drop what I want to say into one of those AI models, and it's going to spit out a perfectly written email. It's
Oh,
going to
right.
be completely grammar free, improper grammar free. And then I can tell ChatGPT to translate that same email into French, Spanish, German, Russian, any language that's out there, and it does it automatically for us.
Wow. Oh,
So,
I never thought about that. Yeah, because yeah, the old Nigerian scam back in the days, you
yeah,
could usually pick up a few things that didn't sound like a Nigerian prince, right?
you're exactly right. And a simple tool that everybody has access to right now solves that problem for the fraudster.
Oh, excellent. Hey, so one other item. I know we had touched on this in our last podcast, but we were talking about some of the fraud tools that help detect patterns,
Mhm.
right? And I think we were talking specifically about AML fraud type of tools. Is there anything going on in that part of the space from the bad guys' perspective? I know the sophistication around trying to catch them is becoming more complicated, but bad guy wise, are we seeing anything else there that helps them, either deposit a check or other ways to try to take grandma's credentials?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're seeing more and more of with the our evolution of these large language models is the fraudster's ability to correlate data. If I went out and bought a data set from, I'll pick on some of the more well-known historical data breaches. So let's say Target and T-Mobile and Joann's Fabrics and all of these nationally known data breaches, right? It took somebody time to write and create correlation databases where they're going to correlate data from each of these data breaches together, trying to build a customer profile, right? The more information I have on Charlie, the better job I can do to actually defraud Charlie, right? Getting all of that data correlated was always a big feat for these fraudsters. That's something that AI has really done a great job from the fraudster's perspective, in that it's able to take those big data sets, right? I can throw in that Target, that T-Mobile, that Joanne Fabric, Ascension Health just had one a few months ago at their hospitals. And you can pull all of this data from these data breaches, and I can pull them together and I can have them sorted and profiles built within minutes. So what used to take them weeks and months, now it doesn't take them any time at all. So now when they start understanding who you are, they start using these data information to start finding you on different types of social medias, where you work, any information about your job, and then they build scripts based on all of this, right? So I can go tell ChatGPT today, write me an email to Charlie that thanks him for his time being for having the conversation with me on his podcast, and boom, in a couple seconds is going to write out that script for me, right?
Yeah.
Same concept. I now can give all this information and say, hey, if I were going to talk to Charlie about his podcast and all his information, it's going to spit all of this information out that I can go and now become personable to Charlie and start attacking you from a fraud perspective. So
Well,
it's getting further and further in depth in the information that they have and on their targets from a fraud perspective.
interesting. Yeah, and one thing that just popped to mind, I think of your security questions that you're asking, right? So if I get breached, now hopefully it's my bank and credit card and not too many others that are asking me security questions, but let's just say Target did.
Yep.
And now Target got breached and they want to know grandma's maiden name or, the name of your grandfather on your father's side or whatever. Not that you always choose the same ones, right? But
Yeah.
often you choose the easy ones.
Oh yeah.
What was your pet in the third grade or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So
You're
if
exactly right.
now they know that, now they have the ability to kind of go get maybe potentially answer some of those security questions that would stop them coming in from another location or what have you. But interesting.
100%.
Wow. Yeah. So the data does make a ton of sense.
We'll be right back.
Is your technology spend getting a little out of hand? Are you worried about making those big strategic moves because of those hefty vendor contracts? Or maybe you just feel like your technology is currently holding you back. In today's banking world, overspending on technology is a risk you just can't take. Going up against those major vendors on your own can be tough, expensive, and especially when the contracts are designed to benefit them. That's where Remedy can come in. Remedy Consulting helps our clients stay competitive and grow their business with the right technology, products, and their spending strategies. Not a Remedy client yet? Head on over to remedyconsult.net for a free review of your tech stack, spending, and contract terms. Even if you're not the perfect fit, you'll walk away with expert advice and confidence in your technology decisions. Check us out at remedyconsult.net or give us a call at 262-955-7776. Thanks for tuning in, and now let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, no, those models allow them to actually really mine that data quickly. And it becomes a faster process, right? So the faster I can data mine, the more attacks I can create.
Yeah. But let's jump over to the good guys side of the equation here a little bit. What's going on that side? What are we learning? Are we getting better on the detection side of the world?
We're getting better. We're not anywhere where we need to be. And the detection really needs to happen in multi levels. And that's probably the hardest thing to wrap your head around is this is not something our institutions can handle on themselves. We cannot just beat this and get an upper hand on these fraudsters just from the bank or credit union space. We can't do it just from a telecom perspective, right? We can't do it from a social media because if you think about it, most of the fraud that's happening out there is scams, and they both start either on social media or through a telecom. So an email, a text message, it needs to be a more concerted effort in attacking fraud. And that's what we're starting to slowly see is people coming to the table that usually wouldn't come to the table and really looking at this more from a holistic perspective instead of my bank is dealing with check fraud and we're going to go fix this problem here, check fraud, then my credit union has problems, ACH fraud, we're going to work here and fix ACH fraud. But actually now working together and looking at patterns holistically. And that's one of the biggest things. Like I mentioned, fraudsters are doing this with AI. This is what we're starting to see the good guys do with AI too, right? So building these consortiums, working through those consortiums, pulling data in not only internally at the institution. And so when I have this conversation with our C level of our customers, they say, hey, where do we start with fraud? I said, okay, most institutions have a card fraud team, a deposit operations fraud team, a digital channel fraud team, a physical security fraud team. Your first step is let's have these four people talk to each other, right? And then let's start sharing that data between them. What can we do to correlate that data that all four of those groups or more at some institutions are working towards? And how do we share data from that perspective? And then once I do it from my internal institution, how can I evolve that further and further out? Then you have different products that are out there that are now redeveloping themselves and doing different things in the industry to be more nimble and use some of the new technologies that are out there to be able to detect and catch fraud. That's probably what you're going to see from software. On the software side, you're going to see all these players in the community bank space, in the credit union space, the mid-tier space, and the tier one space. All of those players that are doing fraud, they're going to have to reinvent themselves in detection, right? Payments have moved much faster than fraud detection systems, right? So a lot of the software technical debt that they own, they can't really get to the speed of transactions. So you're going to start seeing an evolution. You're going to start seeing different products start building out new modules. They'll be building out brand new platforms and solutions. That's one of the things that we're doing at Jack Henry. We've built out a brand new fraud and money laundering platform that allows different things to plug into it. Because again, what we want to do is we want to get as much of that data together to be able to tell that particular information.
Hmm.
So, kind of give you a use case, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
You know, in today's world, let's use grandma since we brought grandma up. If grandma gets her purse stolen, right? So if they take the check part of it and they start using checks and writing fraudulent checks, your deposit operations team is looking at that and, hey, we possibly have fraud. At the same time, your debit card and credit card is being used at your institution, and your debit and credit card team is out there thinking, hey, this might be fraud. But if they knew that check was also suspicious and that card is suspicious, both of them together, you know that something's happening. Now, with some of the new AI, you could sit there and go, okay, not only is that happening, but we just saw a new IP address on that same phone come in on the digital channel and starting transactions in Zelle. So that's what the good guys are doing, is trying to take data from those three disparate or more solutions and pushing it all together to say, look, we have a couple suspicious checks, we have a couple suspicious transactions, we have a new IP address that came with the same machine ID because her phone was in her purse, and unfortunately she didn't have a passcode or lock or anything on her phone. Especially the grandma age, we see that often. But again, pulling that data together and saying, hey, this little bit, and this little bit all together is fraud. And that's where we need to get from an institution and software perspective, from that level. And we can talk a little bit more about the national level.
Because I would imagine that just like banks and credit unions have been built on deposit operations, cards, etc., I would imagine a lot of the software platforms and the core data, right? Like, to some degree, you always hear about siloed core data. Well, these two you'd have to be able to get to both data sets.
No, you're absolutely
right. You
right.
even start this job, right, that we're talking about. And if it's a fintech trying to pull it off, by customer, it's even harder, right? Like, I've got to go, first of all, figure out what core they're on. Then I got to figure out if the core has a different platform than the cards platform. Then I got to figure out how to get the data together. And now I solve for customer number one.
Yep.
And I got to go solve for customer number two. It's going to have a different core and a different right?
Yep.
So data's
Yes.
tough. Data in this area, I imagine, is pretty tough. Let's take that up a level. So we need to get the deposit operations. We'll keep it real simple. We got to get the deposit operations talking to the cards folks.
Yep.
I would think we'd have the same problem across banks. So two banks across the street from each other.
Yeah. Same
bad actor, right?
Yep.
Is it true? I would imagine it must be true then that we also have to make sure that either the banks or the financial institutions in general are talking to each other.
Yeah.
Give us a little insight into that, would you?
Yeah, no problem. So let me give you a little history to then bring it forward to now. So I was one of 21 people that the Federal Reserve brought together to build out the fraud classifier. And that's a project we worked from 2018 all the way to when we released it April of 2022. As part of releasing that, the one thing that we wanted to do is start building fraud metrics for the United States. If you go to the UK, the UK has a fraud metric book they release every year. and it's all the institutions feeding data to the UK central repository, and then they then can sit there and go, okay, look, in the UK, this type of fraud scam is increased 30%. This type of fraud scam has decreased 30%. So we're talking just reporting. We're not even talking sharing information necessarily on an account level type of process. So as we were wrapping up building the fraud classifier, we wanted to build the same kind of process where our institutions would just report, hey, this month we had 300 attempts at card fraud. We had 600 attempts at ACH fraud, and just give metrics. That way the Federal Reserve can look through that data, analyze that data, and then report back to all the institutions, hey, here's some fraud stats for you guys. Because right now, fraud stats are really kind of done by research groups, and you kind of have to piecemeal things together to try to understand what the true fraud effect is in the United States. Back in 2019, the estimated, again, piecing data together from all these research groups, the estimated fraud loss in the United States was 17 billion. Fast forward to 2023, our last complete year, it is our estimated fraud loss in the United States is 151 billion. Wow. Right? So that's a tremendous increase in 4 years. Right. So that's why you're starting now to see institutions come to the table and say, look, we're getting hammered with fraud. We're seeing fraud go up, right? And right now in this age where we see this deposit margin compression, right? One of the things that you can go attack that is non-salaried people is your fraud losses, right? Because every institution, I ask this question everywhere I speak to institutions, how many saw fraud go up, stay the same, or go down? Out of 25 presentations so far in 2024, it's about 76 to 82% all saw fraud go up from the year before. And the numbers show that from the dollar side, as I mentioned as well. Now, when we get that going up, right, and we have that deposit margin compression, look, now they're starting to say, okay, look, let's do something about fraud. What can we do? Where can we go? And we're starting to see things like the ABA is in the process of build. I'm thinking they're in pilot now on a 314B fraud sharing network. You have a private company like Sardine that is teamed up with Blockchain, Visa, and several, and they have about 12 to 16 founding members that are building a fraud network. Jack Henry, with our Defender platform, we are building a fraud network to share information, and others in our industry that are starting to build those fraud networks. Because the one thing that we really have to get institutions to really think about is fraud is never going to be a competitive advantage between you and that institution across the street. Y'all are fighting the same people, and do you go fight them individually, or do you team up and go to that fight? And that's what we're starting to see more institutions do from a national level as well.
Great. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just take one last question. So I was thinking about the sharing of the data, and I would think that might overlap personal information and how much you can share between the institutions, how much they're willing to share, right? There's sort of one set of regulations that go along with the personal information of Charlie that you can share, and then there's this need for fraud protection globally. Do those bump into each other?
Oh, absolutely. It's what can you share and what you can't, and what are you covered under safe harbor, and what are you not?
Is that what the standards are trying to do? To make sure that they have a reasonable amount of sharing without oversharing?
Yeah, there really is, and that is something that it's another group at the Federal Reserve that I'm sitting on right now that we have built a white paper, and we're going through final edits and stuff, and we should be releasing it soon on if you were going to build a fraud sharing network, these are the requirements and these are the things that you should be looking at. And these are the data points that you should be sharing. And there's that old age, and I've had this conversation with a lot of examiners and industry people. Is an account number by itself just the number PI, or is it PI if you include that number with Charlie or number with Renee, right?
Yeah.
So if from a fraud perspective, we really just need that account number or a token that tells us what
To be
account
a
number.
unique identifier, you mean?
Yeah. So we can sit there and go, okay, 15 people at this bank or credit union just sent out 100 payments to this same account number. Now, it might be your local power company. That makes sense, right?
Right.
But what happens if they're all sending it to Jane Doe, and Jane Doe just happens to be in a different country?
I gotcha.
At that point in time, we could sit there and look at it and say, okay, we have all these people sending this money to this account, this number, and 2 of them have now been marked as fraud. Now we can determine that the rest of them we need to stop because it's fraud.
I see. Yep.
So that's what we need from an information sharing, and that's where it gets really tricky on the PI, what's PI and what's not.
Right. Yeah, because even if you identify an account at one, that's Jane Doe number 1, right? And you find another Jane Doe because there's 10,000 of them in the system.
Yep.
Right. The account number, you certainly can, that would help you block the accounts, but may not be able to filter every dollar amount where Jane Doe hooks up with XYZ Corporation in, what a third world country or whatever, for lack of a better term, right? However the money flows offshore.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's great. Thank you, Renee. I appreciate you spending a little time with us, and been great to have you. Is there anything else that you think we can cover in a short amount of time? I think we got to the one that I was looking for, which is sort of that data sharing across the institutions. I thought that was pretty important.
Yeah. I'll just add this. It's a bigger fight than people realize. It's more than just the financial institutions. It's the telecoms. It's the social media. It's the government. All of us have to come together to fight this, because if we try to all do it ourselves, we'll always be 2 or 3 steps behind the fraudsters, which is where we are today. So we're starting to see more from an industry perspective of telecoms, social media coming to the table. When I talked about our fraud network white paper that we're releasing, we had representatives from some of the largest search companies in the world. We had some telecoms. We had a couple social medias part of this group, along with financial industry. And obviously we have the government, because the Federal Reserve is the one that sponsored them, or this project. So you're starting to see that, and you're starting to see the fraud from the different levels. And we're starting to see how something upstream from a telecom and how that will trickle down through multiple different areas before it gets to the financial institution where the fraud actually happens. So stay tuned. There's some really cool things that the industry is doing, and we will continue to do to fight this fraud.
Excellent. Great. Well, I appreciate you spending a little time with us on Bank Talk today.
All right. Thanks, Charlie.
All righty. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Bank Talk podcast, brought to you by Remedy Consulting. To reach out to Renee, to learn more about Jack Henry or their fraud detection, please go to jackhenry.com. Once again, jackhenry.com. If you'd like to learn more about the white paper that was mentioned in this episode, go to the show notes for the white paper. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.